Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. We are sorry that the door was locked and the first group of you couldn't come in. We weren't trying to keep you away. It's just we weren't aware of it, so sorry about that. Tonight, we continue to have our meeting, discussion. More information will be coming to you as to possibilities as we think about this equation of school boundaries. Remember, no solutions yet. We're just talking about the different equations that make it happen. And so I'm going to turn it over to Rob, who's coming back from vacation, and we're happy he came back from it. So Rob, to you.
That is always something when you go on vacation, right? You're always like, why am I coming back? Particularly when you're in a beautiful place. But thank you for being here tonight. We have a lot of stuff to cover. And I hope as you saw the handouts, you saw there's even more information. And so I'm going to take some use of what we did at the last meeting to help us move forward in explanation of what that will be here in a moment. But I always have to start out with some of the things related to why are we here, right? So we're going to have the poll everywhere. So if you just go ahead and get your cell phones out, we're not going to do this till the end of the meeting, but just go ahead. Remember, it's the 2 2s and 3 3s, and you text RSP as in Paul, and then meeting MEETING just to get yourself in. So we'll kind of do that as this is going, and as I circulate around, we'll see if there's questions. I'll try to help you get plugged into that. So if you remember last time we did the dessert thing, I'm not doing any question today because I have them saved at the ends. So some of the committee information. So here we are on August 11th. My arrow wasn't brought down, but we're in meeting 3. So this is the 3rd meeting. This is really where the rubber starts to hit the road, where we see the reality of some of the things that we've been talking about, some of the things that maybe the board provides us some additional direction. And that happened at this last board meeting where the board said, hey, we don't want to, but maybe we may need to consider a repurposing of facilities. So that's something we'll talk about, and you're going to see that in some of our conversation here later. We had this at the last meeting. Remember what we were talking about in the South? We have so much capacity. How can we get kids there? Well, we don't have enough kids in every place of the district to move them to the South. So again, we're going to push our way through. We're in meeting 3. Again, what our roles are. You guys have heard a lot about this ACE that's wrapped around this whole process. The boundary guiding principles. These 5 guiding principles, you're going to see that we try to tie everything back to those guiding principles. Tonight, we are going to give you what our perspective is on how it hits those guiding principles. And again, you may disagree with those, and that's perfectly acceptable. You may have some different perspectives of why each of these concepts that we're showing you tonight don't meet those guiding principles. So again, we're just trying to help you along. The last meeting we heard, hey, can you provide us some insight into what maybe you guys are thinking this stuff is mapping out as it relates to those guiding principles. We have these boundary criteria. So remember, we had this Metro Quest. Here's really what the focus was with the board. If you guys don't mind, I'm just going to talk like this. You guys good? I will pass out if I start yelling under my mask. So with the boundary criteria, we had these 3 areas. We had demographic considerations, we had neighborhoods intact, and then physical consideration, capital, projected enrollment, building utilization. These are always things that we want to focus on when we get to making these decisions. This feels so much better. Can't lie. Ground rules. You guys have been great with the ground rules. Tonight, we again will have a round robin with each of these 2 concepts that we're going to present to you tonight. We'll talk more about consensus when we get to our next meeting. I leave this as always because we're going to get back to this at some point. Even with some of the questions I have for you tonight, I am going to force you to say you like something or you don't like something. Without doing that, I'm not going to understand what you as a group are thinking in the direction that we need to continue to pursue. You'll have all this general information that's in your packet about the past enrollment and demographics, things that are happening with both counties with live birth information and all of this stuff. You've seen this many times, so it's in your packet. I'm not going to talk about it tonight because I want to get to the big things that are related to why we're presenting what we have to you this evening. All right, so and you'll see everything in this presentation builds on whatever we were having as takeaways from the previous meetings. So you're going to see that from whatever it was from meeting 1, which was July 7th, and then July 21st, so our last meeting. What were the things that we provided you from the last meeting that hopefully is helping you understand some of the nuances of how we move through this process? We also had different questions that were played out by your responses with your cell phones. And so you can see that we had some questions about transportation. And most of you said, hey, no more than 30 minutes. When we look at building utilization, we were trying to target each of those buildings being between 75 and 84%. You can see the majority thought that demographic variables should be considered in what that composition looks like. So we have many different variables that we look at, right? We also believed that we wanted to maximize the number of students affected by the boundary change to be less than 30%. So trying to make sure that we don't disrupt the whole system by a large percentage. And then we ultimately, the majority of you wanted to see a complete feeder where we go from elementary from one school to a middle school, and then that middle school goes to a high school. You're going to see it's really challenging where your buildings are located, where the kids are, and then as we start looking at these guiding principles, the boundary criteria, not so easy to be able to accomplish the complete feeder. And in fact, my team has basically said it's about impossible. So usually don't say the word impossible, but I don't think it's possible without you having to acquiesce some other things. So this gets us to some of the new information. So I kept some old information here because when you're looking at these maps, I wanted you to have the ability to know what is the current situation as it relates to the enrollment and the capacity. So you're going to have those same tables that you've seen before for the elementary, the middle school, and the high school. You'll have the notes if you don't remember what all of the stuff is that are on those tables to go back and understand them. We have all the variables that you will see in each of the two concepts tonight. You'll be able to see how does that relate to the current situation. So in this case, the housing type, whether it's single family attached, single family detached, apartments, the ethnicity, and the programming. So you see all of that with everything, whether it's the elementary, the middle schools, even where we're seeing growth areas, how does that correspond? Transportation. One thing that we did here originally was, and I think this was brought to our attention with administration, was 1.5 miles is the benchmark for when transportation is or is not provided. What we're trying to provide you with this 1 mile is more geographic. Like, are people going to the buildings that are within 1 mile of their residence as the crow flies? As we move and vet out some of these concepts, we'll get it into more of the network itself, and hopefully there'll be some application of what time means. So again, the boundaries. We had some questions about past boundary changes, and so the district provided us some perspective of what happened with the last boundary change, which was in 2017. So you can see the guidelines that were used, and you can see the details with the board adoption of what that attendance boundary would change to. We also had some questions about people wanting to know, well, what are the Title I schools and which buildings have preschool? So this is that information. So we know Title I schools are Longwood, Georgetown, McCarty, Gombert, Collishaw, and then the Prairie Children Preschool. So again, those are the buildings, and those are going to be some things that probably come up tonight as we talk about some of the changes that may occur with what we're presenting for the concepts. So I'm going to break out of this, and I'm going to do something that was recommended at our last meeting for you to understand the maps. So when we left here, I initially was like, I'm going to try to provide a transparency so you can flip things down and you can see it. And we quickly, through our mock-ups, were like, there's just so many islands, and pulling it down, it actually created more confusion. So what we have ended up doing is on each of these maps, you're going to see, get the right thing. Give me a second as I pull through here. So you're going to have all the information that is in the presentation in the map itself that we put out at your tables. And so you're going to have the ethnicity, you're going to have the students and units by housing type, you're going to have the feeder as it currently is represented, and then how it gets into the concept. And so I've just pulled up the elementary concept 1 map so you can see how things were related to where it is now and where it will go in the concept 1. Again, these are just proposals. And then as we scroll down, because there's so many different islands, and again, if you didn't understand as the district grew and as we were trying to focus on some of the demographics and balancing enrollment in buildings, some areas were moved to buildings where there was space. So we have these islands. So all of the islands on the map are going to be designated by the column that has the areas. So A2, C2. What you're going to find is the numbers at the end of, so if it's A2, it's always going to be something related to Brooks Elementary. So you're going to start seeing some commonality. One of the things that I had our analysts do is, regardless of which concept, all of the areas, if it's like B2 and it's changing in concept 1 but not changing in concept 2, B2 is always going to be related to what that change is. So if it's always changing, you're going to see it in concept 1, concept 2 as changing. So the numbers that we designate for those areas are always going to be the same. Then if I come over to the maps, the solid color is going to be representing what is being proposed. And you're going to see different lines. Like as I scroll here, you see this yellow, red, gray dotted line. That's DuPage, Will County, right? So it's the break in our county. If I look at these letters that are in that table, so if we look at W20, so right here, if I move my cursor, so this W20, if I come over to that table and I go down to W20, we can see that that's the Fox Valley, East Montgomery Road, and Fontana Road. You can see that's currently at Owen Elementary, and it changes to White Eagle. So those are things that, as again, trying to give you the context of what's in the map, a lot of information. So that's the map, and it'll make more sense as always when we get them out to your table. So if I go back to our presentation, so again, I just have about 5 more minutes, and then I'm going to break out where we have these concepts. I want you all to be looking at these maps. So this is going to be our goal, is again this round robin approach. And what I'm thinking is even more details than what I have here is we'll have, let's say, concept 1, elementary, middle school, and high school. That's one package. So one table gets an elementary, a middle school, high school. We'll go through the round robin of the elementary, middle school, and high school. Then what I'm thinking is we bring them all together, because sometimes you want to see the whole package, right? And I'm trying to make you focus on, hey, if you're looking at the elementary map, here's the elementary, here's the middle school, here's the high school. But then when we bring all 3 of them together, you can see how it is integrated and how those changes may come into play will help with your feedback. But let me talk a little bit about what's happening in each of these concepts. And like last time, I'll roll around in each of these tables, answer your questions. maybe even take down some notes like what do we need more for you to be able to make some of these decisions, at least guide us in where we need to go. So what was our starting point with concept one? So we wanted to start with those elementary building blocks, and we wanted them to be connected. We wanted them to have this neighborhood orientation. We really wanted to remove a lot of the islands that have happened over time. And we wanted to create a reasonable or healthy capacity in each of the buildings so that, for instance, let's say we get 5 new kids. Let's say we get 3 sets of twins, so we get 6 kids. And they're all second graders, that we would have space in the building where we could accommodate the right number of sections. We also were trying in concept one to minimize the feeder breaks from middle to high school. You're going to see as we work our way through that the middle school level, we created schools that have a direct feeder from middle school to high school, and our capacity is going to be able to utilize that. We look at the high school, really it was starting to adjust some of those numbers as we go back to those boundary criteria to get at a first reasonable number of kids in those buildings. And one of the things that I wanted to throw out there that we've, with the Nequa Freshman Center, we really need that space for the number of kids. And if you go back to the data that we have for the number of freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, we need that space in order for the school to function the way it currently is functioning for the number of kids that would be freshmen through seniors. And hopefully you'll see that. So if I notice things like this, I'm just going to tell you here's what it is. So if we want to take the freshman center off, we're going to have to do something different because we're going to lose the capacity that's allowing the space for Nequa to work the way it currently is. Some quick fast facts. We are, as the board indicated at their meeting, that we could explore, don't necessarily want to do it, but with the capacity challenges in this concept, we would take 2 elementaries offline. And for the purpose of geography, we're saying it would be Clow and Graham. Doesn't necessarily mean that those would be the 2 buildings that come offline. It's really to get you to think about the number of kids, the capacity, and if we don't do anything different, if you remember we left the last meeting and we were trying to get some ideas of what you all might think we could explore for changing the capacities. Is it expanding the preschool? Is it having STEM rooms? Is it having professional development spaces? So we got a lot of feedback for you that I believe on our August 25th meeting, we've kind of tasked administration to come up with some things that might be cost or what buildings we could actually do those things to. So just know we're not saying that things have to go offline, but in this concept, we know we have additional capacity. If we just continue to do things the way they are, we are showing you something where 2 buildings go offline. We also have 3 elementary schools that would have broken feeders. And you're going to start to see, as we look at the map, you're not charged with knowing specifically where the kids are, but you're going to start seeing that where the buildings are and how the boundaries look, there's just some limitations that if we value having, let's say, a direct feeder or as most direct feeder schools from elementary to middle or middle to high school, we really have some challenges. And it's just, we really ideally would need 1 elementary building that would be on the north side and things would be a little bit different. So if we could just pick 1 building up, move it to the north, we could really solve some of those things. So that was the starting point for concept 1. You'll see in your packet what that feeder diagram looks like. And so you can see Owen is broken, and so that's why we have broken elementary schools of Brookdale and Longwood as they go to Owen. It'll make more sense when you see it on the maps. There's some other visuals that we're going to do in future meetings that may make this a little bit easier. We also, you'll want to pull this up as you're looking at that elementary map for concept 1. We generally try to say, here's what's changing in this. And so, again, just helping you along so that if you maybe are unfamiliar with an area, you can get a sense of where these changes are taking place. Again, you'll see the projections. One thing that I want to highlight, there's always notes when you look at the map. Note, 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 note. You're gonna have to do a lot of reading when you look at the maps. But when we take a building offline to be repurposed, you're gonna see that red outline. And so that's saying, hey, zero, we're doing something different. So the zero is going to tell you something, but then the red outline also will tell you something as well. And you can see where that enrollments, what that means. Again, the same thing with the housing type, ethnicity, special programming, growth areas. I'm going to go to concept 1 middle school. So again, you're going to see what areas were changing. So visually, you'll see it on a map. Come back to this, and you'll get some context. When we get to the point where we've really drilled down that we're serious about one or a variant of whatever a concept looks like, we'll actually start giving you the place name. So what is the subdivision? What is the apartment name? Right now, we're just kind of generally giving you a perspective. Again, you'll see what that all means with each of those perspectives. Middle school. All right, high school. Again, one of the things that we tried to look at, we heard a lot about transportation. We heard a lot about how do we make some things better without, I believe, the tall grass area always being the place that is shifted one way or the other between Wabunsee and Nequa. You're going to see some variants of that between concept 1 and concept 2. Again, you'll see all that information. Then what I did, because I heard this at the last meeting, like, Rob, what is RSP kind of thinking? Well, I didn't want to like guide you and say this is good or this is bad, but what we tried to set the stage when you go to this page is with concept 1 overall, because we're showing you a complete concept from elementary, middle school, and high school. How do we, as your consultant, your facilitator, how do we feel that it meets first the guiding principles? So the 5 guiding principles in concept 1, we generally think it will be able to meet it. Now, is it the best way to meet it? That's where we have this conversation in this group. Then when we got to the boundary criteria, we kind of give you some perspectives of what we're thinking is happening as it relates to those boundary criteria. So we give you a somewhat, extremely, and poorly. So why are we saying poorly on capital physical considerations? Well, the reason I give it poorly is not like it's like bad from the standpoint of it's bad and how we maybe would evolve to this concept. It's more that we would have 2 buildings going offline, and I don't think anyone wants to take 2 buildings offline. So that automatically makes us say, hey, this is something that maybe the community doesn't want, much like the committee or even administration or even us as RSP. But then there's also, if you were to take a building offline, what would need to be invested in that building to repurpose it to something else? Or if you were taking it offline and selling it, do we have a willing seller? We don't know those things. And so that ultimately is why we were saying, hey, it's poorly, but you may have a different opinion. You may say, hey, you're taking these buildings offline, we're more efficient, we have better class sizes in our buildings, more dollars can be invested in actual teachers and resources in the other buildings. So again, just as what lens you're looking through. So again, trying to provide you some of that feedback. We also give you some of the things that we think might be benefits or things that may be drawbacks with this option. And again, you may think some of the drawbacks are actually a benefit. So you have the ability to say, we disagree. You're not going to offend myself or my team as we look at what your comments are. You live in this community, and you get to help play into what does this look like as we move through this process. So that was concept 1. So when we get to concept 2, very similar thing, where we were, again, trying to keep these building blocks, knowing that elementary neighborhoods really are good at building into the middle schools and then into the high schools. And in this particular concept 1, we did breaks from elementary to middle. In concept 2, our breaks are from middle school to high school. So we'll be asking you about that, where if you have to make a break, we already have breaks, but where would we most prefer to make a break if we have to make a break? Again, this concept, we only are eliminating or repurposing 1 building. So concept 1 was 2 buildings, concept 2 is only 1 building. Again, you'll see what that feeder diagram looks like. So anywhere you see that orange area is where we have breaks in the feeder. And Owen is just a struggle. It's a struggle where it is and how we get kids and how it feeds. And again, you guys know that as you look at the maps. We again provide you the information about generally what are the areas that are changing in this concept. Again, all of the information with everything, this is all on your maps. And if it's not on the map, you come back to this. Same thing with the middle school. One of the things that I didn't say with Concept 1, any areas that are currently unassigned that we know residential activity is going to happen, specifically around the Fox Valley Mall, we're assigning it an attendance area. So that's a benefit. Again, you'll see what those projections are at the middle school, how this relates to the growth areas, proximity to the building. I think we ended up changing the new analysis to 1.5 miles so it follows what your transportation guidelines are. Again, same thing with the high school. And then you see something that looks, again, similar. These concepts are similar in how we're looking at it. We can meet the guiding principles. We have some more discussion as it relates to the boundary criteria. You'll see some of the benefits and drawbacks with this concept from our perspective. We're expecting you'll expand on that. All right. So that gets us, go back to our activity. You can see you have probably about 40 pages of analysis. It's a lot of stuff. So now what I'm going to do, got a question. It's the same thing. So it's just wording. We can say offline, repurposed, closed. Basically, we're not likely in this concept. We're saying it's not going to have core K-5 educational programming. It'll be something different. But good question. Good question. Anything else before I jump in? This is probably a good thing. And hopefully with some of the explanation I'll take with a fellow planner about, hey, show the map. Hopefully that helps you a little bit. I know it makes more sense when the maps actually are at your table. So I'm looking at, we have 3. I'll come back to your question. We see we got 3, 6, 8, 9. All right, so we're going to have 2 concept 1s, 1 concept 2 with the group that we have here. We're going to rotate you through so you see both of them. But I'm going to come back to a question you had there. Yeah, exactly. So the question is, are we trying to find space for preschool? Are we trying to find space for steps? And the answer is yes. And if I'm at liberty to talk, Matt, one of the things that we've talked about administratively is one of the most expensive programs to push forth in the buildings is the preschool. And so that's going to be something that as we look at those spaces, if we do expand it, does that fit within the budget constraints? Definitely steps, things with STEM. I think on August 25th, that's where we can maybe, instead of saying, hey, is there buildings we take offline? Is it maybe we can use spaces a little bit differently that provide opportunities where it's like a group setting, where we have multiple schools that maybe can come to a building to do something, or maybe there's some professional development. So absolutely, steps, preschool. Question over there. I'll put that on the parking lot. That's a good question. So what is the demand as the preschool program currently exists? Definitely, we'll get some numbers for that question. Yeah, good question. So when it gets to be, could have we done a little bit more? Well, as we started digging in, we're like, it maybe looks a little bit odd. So what we would be recommending is, as you as the committee look at this, when you look at some of the things like where there's growth or where we're factoring there's this regreening, are we comfortable where it's at 95%, or do we need to cut it back more? And that's going to be, as you look at the maps, you'll kind of see some of this where we really try to follow some of the roads, so that way if you have buses or the parents are coming and going, or if you have walkers or bikers, to try to maximize some of those components. But yeah, we could get them in some instances closer to 90%. Some of our challenges, like I'm thinking with Longwood, it's like, we already have a couple islands that are right there, and one of the things with the size of that building being smaller, I think it's like a 480 building, we just can't take in a whole area, so it gets to be a little bit challenging. And so do we accept that 95% is good? I would not say it's an SOL. It's more like, hey, maybe we can actually accommodate that as we move forward in time. But good question. Anything else before we pass these maps out? Oh, if you got an answer, absolutely.
So I sent this question to our principal of our pre-K program on July 22nd, and here's her response. It will answer some of what you asked. Pre-pandemic, we have not typically turned tuition families away, so we have space. Since 2011, we have added one self-contained classroom with 2 sessions, one blended classroom with 2 sessions. Additionally, Title I preschool has increased since 2011 with 1 half-day session to 6 half-day sessions. I think the question we may want to think about would be full-day pre-K programs as opposed to half-day programs. I think that's really where we may want to think about.
Thank you. So would your perspective be that maybe there's not a preschool classroom at Longwood? What? Let's put that down as a question, because that is the answer I would give you is probably more legalistic. It depends, right? What are we getting for the number and type of kids that are coming into that building? But that's a very relevant question when we're looking at buildings that are at 95% utilization. Next question. Cool. Well, what I will do now is we're going to put these maps out, and I do want to have everyone to have an opportunity to look at concept 1, concept 2. I'm going to let you have a little more time when we first start on the map, because just getting yourself oriented back to where we were at our last meeting, and then we'll kind of move through. And then I do think that if we can then put the elementary, middle school, and high school for the concept, and you see how that moves through, so that you're not visually like just, okay, what was that at that last table for the elementary? Which elementaries fed here or whatnot? We'll be able to accomplish that. So let's get this passed out. We'll dig in. All right, if we do a rotate, I made it this direction. So if you are at table 3, go to table 4. If you're at table 4, go to table 8. Table 8 will come back to table 3. Table 2, you'll go to table 5. 5 will go to 7. 7 will come back to 2. And whatever this table number is, you will go to 6. Yeah, you'll go to 1. Then 6 will go there. 6 will go further on where it's an empty table to the high school. All right, here's what I'm going to ask us to do with the time. It may be that we move the tables, but if you take these 3 tables, and we have the elementary, the middle school, and the high school map for concept 1, and the same thing here, we could do that, or we could try to just put them on the floor and you could look at them. But if you could see the elementary, middle school, and high school in unison as you as a group are looking at them, I think that's where I want to take the next 5 to 7 minutes and you flush out how does that concept look. And then because concept 2 people didn't see concept 1, what I'd like to do is a report out where those of you 2 tracks were in concept 1, you can say here's what we generally thought and saw, and in concept 2 we'll do the same thing. So those that didn't see concept 2, again, this is not final tonight. I'm really trying to get some themes of what you guys are thinking. So let's go ahead and do that. If you can, like, somehow, if you want to just put the maps together, either move the tables or move all the maps to one table, just so you can see it all as one plan. the tables, and maybe it may be a good idea if we just group around a table so you might be able to see what a representative from the concept might say about each of the levels. So if we'll start here, this was concept 2. Let's start with concept 1. So we have 2 maps of concept 1, so you can stay at the concept 1s, but if you're at concept 2, migrate half over to concept 1, half over to the other concept 1 to the left of you. Do I have one representative? I wonder if Brian might be the representative to just give your overview of what you absolutely liked and then what was something that you thought was a concern.
All right, for concept 1, overall, we felt like this was moving in a good direction and needed a couple tweaks because there were some subdivisions that were getting split that, okay, let's try to keep the subdivisions together. There were also a couple areas on the elementary level where it's like you have kids that can see an elementary school, can walk to it, that you've made a busser. And it's like, okay, I don't know how much a bus runs. None of us really deal with that level of math, but it's like, okay, if a kid can walk, that's a kid that you don't have to bus, and that reduces expenses. And there were some areas that we got that you really tried to consolidate the areas, clean stuff up, and for the most part, it looked really good. There's some areas that, with some of the guiding principles, we get why you did it, but need to be tweaked a little bit, and may break some of that to get things accomplished. But the big thing is it looked better, it was moving in a better direction, but still needed some tweaking to make sure that subdivisions did what they did. The other thing too was with the numbers that we were looking at, if we viewed them correctly, it did seem to have a very high disruption level, and that with the students. So I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything. Like, that was kind of the feeling I was getting from everybody and what we talked about. But other than that, it seems like it was a fairly good direction. And I know from my prior groups that it seemed like some of the stuff that we put down was being listened to, as far as like, okay, let's not have so many islands, and that we know we're gonna have to have the islands and certain levels of bussers because of where schools are sitting. But it does seem to make some level of sense.
Great. I'll go over to the other concept 1 as I'm walking over. So something I want you guys to think about, when we eliminate the existing islands and go to something else, we're going to be disrupting kids, right? There'll be more kids disrupted. So what I heard was from that group on concept 1, there's still some subdivisions that are being split, and there may be transportation. If you put on those maps those specific subdivisions and what your transportation, we will be able to see if we can address that in any modification. Someone over here who wants to talk more to concept 1, or did that person capture this synergy of what you in this group of 3 different tables were thinking? Absolutely.
Brian, was that you talking? So over here at Concept 1, I see that these communities, sorry if I can have you, we have Bristol Station, Pasquale's, Bridgewater of Naperville, Metro 59, Union Square, which is all pretty far away from May Watts, flipping to May Watts. Yet the adjoining communities that currently walk to May Watts, that are right next to the school, Buttonwood, Countryside, the Fields, and Westwind, are flipping to Owen. That's, to me, that doesn't make any sense at all.
And on the surface, you are right. But here's what happened. So when we looked at Brookdale and Longwood, and we had all these different islands, what we're trying to show in concept 1 is, could we expand and have an attendance area that would become something larger than just one subdivision or one apartment complex. But if we as a group are saying we don't like that, then we would have to look at something different. And maybe you say the areas that you're mentioning, maybe those get flipped to May Watts, but then we still have too many kids for Longwood and Brookdale to be able to be in that area. So it's one of those things as we kind of move our way through is having just a single island that goes to one building and another single island to another building. Is that where we want to stay, or do we do something like this?
Well, I get it. You know, in May Watts, as I was explaining to my table mates, it looks like a jigsaw puzzle that fell on the ground. You know, we pull from many communities by the train station as well as those that are right around our school. But to take a community that currently walks to school and pull them to another school while taking communities that are currently bused to May Watts or bused to other schools now get bused to May Watts.
And we'll make note, because again, I'm not even arguing. I'm just giving you the sense of how we came to that, and then can we create more of a neighborhood school around May Watts? That's where we dig in a little bit more. But just know that if we do that, then we're gonna have to move some other kids maybe farther, and that's the counterbalance. So concept 2, who wants to be my speaker of what they saw? And I know the 2 concept 1s, you didn't get a chance to look at this. We'll still have some of this when we come to our next meeting. Who wants to be our ref speaker? Does one of our students want to talk? Jonathan?
Taking a look at this really quick, it looks a lot cleaner than last week or last meeting. If you guys remember, all of the islands are kind of reduced, other than, like you were saying, May Watts, it's a jigsaw puzzle that you're working with. My group, when we were looking at these maps, we didn't have a ton of changes, especially high school. High school seemed relatively clean. You're not messing with the area, you're not changing areas that don't have to be changed, so there's not a lot of disruption, not a lot of pushback from the community. And then the areas that are becoming prevalent with people there that weren't, you're not moving people, you're just adding people, so it doesn't matter where you put them necessarily. So high school looks good. Middle school, my group didn't get as much of a chance to look at and talk about as a group. So we're still discussing this middle area, but overall, down in the south and up in the north looks pretty solid. And then the elementary school is just elementary school.
That's probably a fair statement. All right, so if you pick up your cell phones, I'm going to just end us with a few questions, and they're not going to be all the questions that I had. And as I get to those questions, I'm going to tell you what does the next meeting look like. Particularly if you didn't see concept 2 or you didn't see concept 1, you're like, well, I didn't see those. What does this mean? Well, I had our analysts come up with 2 different types of concepts. The big difference was where we were seeing breaks and the idea of, do we keep islands or do we expand them? So let me get to my questions. So if you get your cell phones out. All right, so this first question, I believe the repurpose of inventory should be considered to have better district-wide utilization. So I'm forcing you either yes or no. Yes, we should consider repurposing, or no, we should not. And I've already told you that at our next meeting, administration is going to talk about, is there some other ways in which, where we have spaces, or how we may want to look at each of the elementary buildings, can we create spaces that provide a better utilization of the building? So we're not honed in, but we did hear on Monday that the board was open to some repurposing opportunities. Right now, it's all of the above. It might be, let's say you move some special programming to a building, or you make that building a preschool. So we're not really honed in on when it's repurposed, it goes officially offline and it's not used for anything. It might be for something else. And that's something that administration, that's as they go through some other strategic planning, facility master planning, they'll get to that point. We're just trying to look at from the context of what capacity means, what the boundaries are, where enrollment is, how does this start to help us understand what to do. All right, so there we go, 92% understood that. All right, so this will refresh as you guys go. So I believe we should maintain islands rather than impact more students with an attendance area. So this is where I was talking about, like with this May Watts. Okay, so we expanded it in concept one so that we have an attendance area that is larger, that if the people in one part of a subdivision and then there's an adjacent subdivision, they're all going to go to the same place. Whereas right now with some of the islands, you could be next to each other and go to different elementary buildings. So what we're trying to get at here is, do we maintain islands or do we eliminate the islands? And we've showed you tonight where we've been eliminating them. All right, I'll do a countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm not going to ask you this because you didn't see both of those. So that was all. There's only one other question. I'll let you do this, and then I'll talk just briefly. So we meet on, I believe, August 25th. What my team is going to do is don't feel like, hey, I didn't see concept one or I didn't see concept two, I'm at a disadvantage. We're going to take the input that we had from you on concept one and concept two, and we're going to try to see, can we make them all better? And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to make this at the 25th meeting, where each of your tables, we're going to give you the elementary, middle school, and high school. You're not going to rotate out to say elementary, middle school, high school. You're going to see them all as one. And we're going to try to have it where you see both concept one and concept two. I also, from other things I heard from other people, I will start giving you where we think things are more definitively with the data. So for instance, when we looked at, with Dr. Talley, we were like, hey, what's the free and reduced lunch? We maybe changed something with the existing population where one building went down 7 kids and another building went up 6 kids. We didn't really change what would happen with that particular subgroup or the English language learners. So we'll start giving you more stuff because I know all of this data can be overwhelming for some of you, and I don't want you to be overwhelmed. I don't want you to not come back saying, gosh, this is too much data, I don't understand this. So we're going to help you along in that particular manner. The last thing that I was told to throw out to you all is when we get to those public inputs. So we're trying to nail down the specific dates, and I think we maybe are leaning towards 3 public inputs, 1 at each of the high schools, and I believe it's going to be the first week of November. We're trying to figure out what those days are, and we'll talk more about this on the 25th, leading you up. So we're trying to create a conversation with our community, not an argumentative, not a give me the microphone, I want to yell, you guys are idiots, what are you trying to do? So there's going to be a lot of stuff that we do with communication to get it out to the people, with stuff that'll be on the website. And the idea is when we get to the public input, they'll be the same at each of those 3 nights. And we'll have a presentation, probably have Dr. Talley, the board president, say something. RSP will say, here's why we're here, here's how we got here, and then we'll break out to smaller groups where people can see, hey, let's say it's just 2 concepts. Concept 1, here's what all of this is, and they can provide their feedback. We then bring everyone back where we can answer questions. We found this to be very productive with people that come in. If they're not going to be surprised, we're going to be telling them this is what's going on. So we'll talk more about that on the 25th. I want to throw it back to Dr. Talley, recognitions of board members and such.
Thank you, Rob. Just very quickly, I want to say to all of you, thank you for sticking through with this. Your input, the conversations are just really tremendous and very helpful to all of us. I want to thank the board members, Ms. Sapna Jain in the back, and Miss Susan Deming for being here as well. And again, when we come back, school will have started. Yay! And we're looking forward to that. So again, thanks everybody. Yes, ma'am. Yes, we heard about that. And Matt, do you want to say anything about that?
I can talk briefly to it. Yes, the elementary curriculum nights that are scheduled that night, all those presentations are done through Zoom, which I think we're all familiar with by now. They will be recorded and available. And then we've asked the principals to make sure that for the individuals in this group, there's some additional reach out as part of that. So we're hoping that'll allow everybody to participate on the 25th here, and then also to be able to view and get that interaction through the curriculum night as well.
So that could possibly happen next school year. It's the board that will make the decision about when it'll be implemented. It could be, I'm not speaking for the board, what I've seen in other places, it could be phased in, it could all be done immediately, but the plan would be for next school year. Okay?